What's up, Flannelverse? Two more games on this divisional round weekend. Should be fun ones. We got Philadelphia hosting the Rams, and then we have the Bills hosting the Ravens. The Ravens favored on the road in the afternoon slate. Three really good running quarterbacks. A lot going on in the slate. Hopefully, yesterday's slate went well for you guys. Kind of a mixed bag for me. The Mahomes fade went really well, but overall didn't have enough Jaden Daniels. I feel like that would have been helpful to have for the main slate. Can't even remember all the things that went right and wrong. Ultimately, I know what went wrong is I had so much Hollywood Brown and DeAndre Hopkins, and I don't know what happened there. Just the Chiefs didn't throw to their receivers at all. It was just all Mahomes, Kelsey, which maybe that was predictable in the playoffs to some extent, but I really thought that it seemed like Hollywood was going to be a big part of the offense. I'm still not convinced that he's not going to be next week, but yeah, yesterday did not work out at all. Christy says, hello, my birds are playing at 3 p.m. Excited and ready. Hope the Eagles are. Hopefully you didn't see my rankings, Christy, of who I want to win the Super Bowl this year. I believe I had the Eagles second to last. However, caveat there is some of my good friends are from Philadelphia and are big Eagles fans, and I'm going to watch the game today with them. So, I don't really cheer for the Eagles because their NFC didn't treat Vikings fans well when we were there, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, a lot of my good friends are Eagles fans. So I will be cheering for them today, certainly. I don't really feel that strongly about who I want to win. Just the most exciting teams to me. I wanted the Lions were number one to me, wanted the Lions to win. My second and third in terms of teams that I want to win are the Ravens and the Commanders. I just think watching Lamar and Jaden Daniels is so fun that those two are up there for me. But honestly, I would not be opposed to a Bird Super Bowl, assuming that I have some playoff best ball teams that have the Eagles in them in the Super Bowl. Then I'll be okay with it. All right, we're gonna go as usual, position by position here: quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends, defenses, kickers. I will take any questions. I'll play around with lineups. I will, after I go through position by position, I'll take a brief look at both of the showdown slates for today. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to ask throughout. I will, make a more directed effort at looking at questions later on, but I try to get to them throughout the show as well. Good to see many of you in here. I should throw it up here right now. Reminder, trying to get to 5,000 subscribers by the end of the NFL season. Would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel. I do also have subscribers only mode on right now, so you in chat, so you can't comment without being a subscriber, but if you subscribe within, I think, a minute I have it set up for, you can comment, ask any questions at that point. All right, so starting with the quarterbacks, and some of you, if you were here yesterday, a lot of what I'm going to say today is repetitive of what I said yesterday, but it's only two games, kind of changes the whole complexion. But in terms of like the matchups, obviously nothing has changed for the matchups on this one. So we're seeing Lamar Jackson coming in at 29% on the two-game slate, Josh Allen 33%, Jalen Hurts 28%, and Matthew Stafford just 10%. If we take a look at the matchups for this slate, we have, now it's somewhat removed, decent above-average matchup for Lamar going up against the Bills. Philadelphia, below average matchup for Jalen Hurts, both on the ground and through the air. Tough matchup for Matthew Stafford. Again, I mean, he doesn't really run, but through the air. And then a tough matchup for Josh Allen. So nobody having good matchups among these quarterbacks. But to me, again, I said it yesterday, I'll say it again. I think I'm leaning into the second game on this slate. Maybe less so on the two-gamer than the four-game slate. I really like this one. I think it has the potential, and I still feel good about that. Jaden Daniels put up like 25 fantasy points, I want to say, like a nice score, but not a have-to-have-it score. I think pretty easily Lamar and Josh Allen could both outscore him. At least one of them puts up a bigger number. So I'm still feeling pretty good about having a lot of exposure to the quarterbacks in the later game for the four-game slate. I think I'm largely going to play it the same way on the two-game slate. Now, we do have, they are the two expensive quarterbacks on the slate, so it doesn't make it super easy. Stafford, of course, is the one that you look at it, you don't really want to get to a ton of Stafford, but then he's 5,200 allows you to do a lot more with your lineup than the other quarterbacks, and only projected for 10% ownership. So I actually think I kind of like Stafford on this slate, just given the lack of ownership and the huge price discount. I mean, $1,600 cheaper than the others. Maybe I'll play around with lineups for this slate to kind of figure out what we can do with Stafford versus the other quarterbacks. Because I think people asked, somebody asked yesterday how concerned I am with the weather, and I'm not like extremely concerned about it. It's not having a huge impact on what I want to do, but it is something to like, if ownership is going one direction, maybe give you some reason to think about playing the other side. Now, in this side, we have both games are kind of not great weather. So in Philadelphia, this is Kevin Roth's report. Weather report says snow game looks set here. I'm expecting 1 to 2 inches of snow in game with sustained winds 10 to 15 miles per hour and winds gusting up to 25 miles per hour. That sounds like tough conditions for Matthew Stafford. So I was going to say, if the weather was better here, maybe I would lean more into that game. But that's tough. Snowing and sustained winds with big gusts. Don't love the weather there for Matthew Stafford. So maybe I take it back. It's going to be hard to get there. I'm thinking like the second game is also going to be dealing with some weather, and I'll read that off. This is again Kevin Roth. Absolutely frigid temps with a chance for snow. Temperatures will be in the teens during the game. While cold weather doesn't have as dramatic an impact on scoring as, say, high winds, there is a slight correlation between low temps and lower scoring games. We could also see some scattered snow showers. I think the brutal cold temps and chance of passing snow is a slight bump down to offenses. So I think we're just seeing bumps down to offenses overall, which, if scoring is going to be muted, that would make me like Matthew Stafford better. Like if both games have kind of muted scoring and we're not expecting a ton of touchdowns, then it's easier for Matthew Stafford to stay within 5 fantasy points, 8 fantasy points, whatever, of the other quarterbacks on the slate. And if that's what you need to be able to get to Saquon and Derrick Henry, which it very well could be, they're expensive running backs, and these could be games where the teams are just running a ton in the cold weather. So it could be that you need Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, and Kyren Williams. And if that's the case, it's going to be tough to get there with anybody but Matthew Stafford. So yeah, ultimately, I think the weather does, like the bad weather in both games, makes me like Stafford just a little bit better here on the 2-game slate. I still expect, because we have, Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen are 2 of the quarterbacks on the slate, I think they're going to be running it a lot. And the bad weather doesn't negatively impact the amount that I expect them to score fantasy points on the ground. But it could slow the games down and make it more feasible for Matthew Stafford to be, within striking distance. So I kind of like Matthew Stafford on the 2-game slate. I don't know if I played much at all on the 4-game slate, but on the 2-game slate, just trying to find ways to get different. And I think that is one way to do it, is to play Stafford, maybe just a single stack with Puka or something like that. And then see if you can get, fit all of Puka and Henry and Saquon and another James Cook or Kyren into the lineup. If that is possible, I think that would be kind of a fun way to try to build. But kind of getting lost here for me is Jalen Hurts, which maybe is foolish, because he is actually, he's $900 cheaper than Josh Allen, $1,000 cheaper than Lamar Jackson. Has the weather impacts them all, but I could see Hurts running a little bit more. I don't know. It is tough. I feel like we're in that the era now where the field is so good that I see these ownerships, and honestly, nothing really stands out as totally off to me. So it is going to be very much a make sure your lineups look good. I think you can make good lineups with any of these quarterbacks. How would I rank them? Probably be, Lamar getting lower ownership than Josh Allen. I think I like Lamar the best on this slate, followed by, I still think that I like Lamar and Josh Allen the best, but not to the extent that I'm going to be significantly overweight on either of them. Yeah, maybe I can't even say that, because at this point it's like you look at these ownerships. I think I want to be overweight to 10% Stafford and just play my lineups, not as though I expect Stafford to put up 25 fantasy points, but just play it as though, what if Stafford puts up 15 and nobody else puts up more than 22, and Stafford lets you get to all the other stud pieces that you need on this slate. So I think I'm probably going to be overweight to Stafford. So as much as I want to rank it the other way, I think it's probably Lamar, then Stafford for me. And then I'll probably be a little bit underweight on both Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. Not significantly, but I expect that I'll be a little bit overweight on Lamar and Stafford, a little bit underweight on Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. Yeah, and we looked at the matchups. I don't know that we can learn that much from usage trends here. I guess I have this pulled up the past 5 games. We can just look at how they've been doing recently in terms of fantasy production. Lamar, the best of the group, over the past 5 games, 26.8 fantasy points per game. Josh Allen, 20.4. That's interesting because he just had those games where he put up like 45 and 50 or whatever in 2 weeks. So this must have been right before the past 5 games. Feels more recent than that, but and then we have Matthew Stafford. Jalen Hurts just 16.8 over the past 5 games. And then, of course, Stafford will be the worst here. 10.2. He did have a brief period, like right when Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp came back, where he was scoring fantasy points, which is out of the ordinary for Stafford, but it was notable. Like they came back and he immediately had a little stretch where he put up like 20 to 20. I think he had a game where he spiked up to like 28 fantasy points. I don't know. I think he's capable at least of putting up a big fantasy score. I'd be surprised if Stafford is the highest scorer on the slate. But again, you don't need him to be the highest scorer because of the price tag there. All right. Yeah, it depends how well value does a wide receiver. Yeah, I mean it's also this happens a lot in the playoffs where we're getting to a lot of these teams that are like, okay, the Chiefs, okay, they're probably going to win. Who's going to score fantasy points? And outside of Kelsey, tough to figure out who's going to score. Same thing with the Bills. Like, okay, Josh Allen is going to score fantasy points. Who else on the Bills is going to put up fantasy points? And it is a tough time now to figure out who you want to play. So it's possible that none of the value is really good here. They could just kind of spread it out enough. Joshua, thank you for joining live. Good to see you here. All right. Trying to read through chat here. Is that right? Total on, yeah. LA Philly game is only 41 to 42 points. Oh, shoot, I have. Oh, here it is. I'm seeing 43 and a half. This could be outdated, the number that's on lineup HQ, but it's showing me Philadelphia implied team total 25.25, Rams 18.25. So the Eagles full touchdown favorites. It looks like it's 43 and a half where I'm seeing it. I'm sure it varies. Yeah, Hurts. It's like I kind of feel like maybe this is wrong, but I feel like the weather should be better for Lamar than Hurts or Allen, and in particular Hurts, because like he scores his fantasy points on the ground through touchdowns more so than yardage, whereas Lamar is kind of a mix. Like he could just like hit 100 yards on the ground. So if they're just running more, I feel like it would be better for Lamar. But maybe Hurts, maybe they just run more with Hurts too. So maybe even though he doesn't usually run quite as much as Lamar, maybe he does in this kind of if the weather's not good enough to throw it as much. All right. Our Stanley asks, where's Adam? Adam has not been on this channel in at least a couple months at this point. He got tired of doing NFL content is essentially where it came what it came down to with Adam. And then we were never like, we didn't have a like we should do this all year. It was kind of like, let's do this as long as you want to come on, I'll have you on my channel, and lasted longer than I expected it to. But yeah, was not. I don't know. He didn't even play yesterday's slate. All right. Let's go. Okay. Hurts is rusty. Guy was in concussion protocol for too long. I think, yeah. I think I agree with Christy. I think he'll be fine here. I don't know. He's kind of an enigma. Some games to me, and I don't watch every Eagles game, but like he looks awesome, like super confident, really good. Want to bet on that guy kind of quarterback. And then other games to me, he just looks like deer in the headlights. Looks like he's lost out there. I don't know. Hurts is can't quite figure him out. All right, I'm going to move on to running backs. All right. All right, I guess I'll sort by. I've got to sort it by salary. I'll keep it there. So we've got Saquon Barkley, highest salary, highest projection, looks great. Also getting a ton of ownership. So 21.8 fantasy point projection for Saquon at 8,200. Project for 61% ownership, which I loved him on the 4-game slate where it was not projected for a ton of ownership, which is something that went a little bit wrong for me because I ended up underweight to the field on Jahmyr Gibbs, not by a ton, but by a little bit. And you obviously need Jahmyr Gibbs. But on this 2-game slate, I think he pretty clearly looks like the best running back, and he's projected for 2 fantasy points more than 2, better than the second best running back on this slate. Here's where I'm going to pull up the fantasy points numbers here also. I didn't realize they were doing ownership projections for this one, so that's cool. They haven't projected for 80% ownership, still projected for just a 1.5 better in terms of the fantasy projection there. I think 80 is probably high for Saquon. Maybe not. I mean, it's a nice spot. Let's take a look at the matchup data. So this is schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed per game by the defense here over the past 5 weeks. So over the past 5 weeks, man, they're just all at the bottom here. So second to worst possible matchup for Kyren Williams against the Eagles defense. Third to worst for Saquon, which kind of surprises me a little bit, even though I just looked at this yesterday. 6th worst for James Cook and 7th worst. So every single one of these teams has a bottom 7 matchup in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to the running back position. And they're all like, it's all pretty significantly below neutral over the past 5 weeks. 5.7 below average for the Bills defense, 9.9 for Rams defense. Let's take a look at the full season also. Just kind of curious. Because I recall the Bills being a bit of they were a run funnel for much of the year. Just not as much recently. And still, this is like, these numbers are not that far off of neutral. It's been a tough matchup all year against the Eagles. So tough matchup for Kyren. Tough matchup against Baltimore. Yeah, all of this adds up. I honestly, earlier in the year, I felt like I didn't think the Rams defense is going to be very good. They really kind of surprised me this year with how good they have been defensively. But ultimately, we have to choose from these running backs. And I think the weather could be a boost to the running games to some extent. They just might be forced to run it a little bit more. Which I don't know how much more work you can really give to Saquon and Derrick Henry. They've been getting basically all the work they can handle already. But I think, both look great. I think with Henry being projected for lower ownership and being a little bit cheaper, I think, honestly, I'm not taking any stand. I think Saquon and Henry, the ownership looks about right. I almost want to flip these two. Just because Henry is so matchup proof, but so is Saquon. He has been just crushing it all year. Those look fine to me. I do think my biggest stand is probably going to be, this is too much for Kyren, in my opinion, just a really tough matchup. He is so volume dependent already. And I think that they could be playing from behind in Philadelphia. So I think I'm going to be, I'm happy with the ownership on taking all the Barkley and Henry. I think I'll be light on Kyren Williams. I think I'm okay with James Cook's ownership at 39% at 6,700. Looks pretty good to me. They could just be running it a ton. He's been pretty boom bust this year. He's had some really nice games. I do, once again, and I said this on yesterday's show, and it didn't really work out. Like Kareem Hunt sort of got there, but not really. But I really like the RB2s here, particularly really just Ty Johnson and Justice Hill. Kenny Gainwell, not as much. He's getting like no ownership. I think that's probably what it should be. But Justice Hill and Ty Johnson, because both are pretty game script dependent. They're more likely to play in like third and long situations or where they just are playing from behind. And this is a game where both these offenses are so good, both these teams are so good, Baltimore and Buffalo, that they're usually playing from ahead, which doesn't really set up well for Justice Hill or Ty Johnson. But today, with the spread being so close, I think either one of these teams is live to take a big lead, in which case the RB, the pass catching running back from the opposing team is going to look really good. So I think both Ty Johnson and Justice Hill look better today than they usually do because it's a little bit more likely that their team is going to be playing from behind and that they're going to catch more passes. Yeah, Hill to me is my favorite of that group. Now we also have no Ray Davis, so Ty Johnson a little bit more secure. So actually maybe not. Maybe Ty Johnson I think looks just as good here at a little bit lower ownership and price tag. So I think I actually I liked Hill the best going into yesterday, but I think looking at these numbers, I think Ty Johnson actually looks a little bit better with no Ray Davis. Baltimore is actually favored in this game, even though it's in Buffalo. So I think Ty Johnson just a little bit more standalone value with no Ray Davis. And of course, they both have continued value if anything were to happen to the starting running backs. But I really like both Ty Johnson and Justice Hill, even at these numbers. These are higher than you usually see on the backup running backs. But like even at these numbers, I will be overweight to those two. And you kind of need those values. Like you can't play Saquon and Derrick Henry if you also want to play Lamar Jackson and I mean, I guess none of the pass catchers is that expensive, but if you want to pay up elsewhere with the quarterback, it's going to be tougher to fit them if you're also playing Saquon and Henry. So I like the value for Ty Johnson and Justice Hill. I got the question yesterday, would you play like Derrick Henry and Justice Hill together or James Cook and Ty Johnson? Yeah, on a 2-game slate, absolutely no issue with playing the running backs together. I think it's a way to get a little bit different. So yeah, no issue with it, even though like part of the reason we like there situations that are pretty game script dependent, and obviously Justice Hill and Derrick Henry is a great example of Derrick Henry. You like him in situations where they're up, and you like Justice Hill in situations where they're playing from behind, but you don't really need that much out of Justice Hill here. So I think yeah, no issue with playing the running backs from the same team in the same lineup on the 2-game slate, or even in the 4-game slate, really. Okay. What else? We looked at the matchups. Anything else we need to look at for the usage trends? Maybe we want to take a quick look. I already pulled it up. So looking at this is the past 5 games for the Eagles. Actually, past 4 games for the Eagles. I guess did they rest starters in week 18? I don't remember why Saquon only played 4 games here. I guess I can look at the game log. Oh, and this does not have wild card. There we go. Yeah, probably looking at the game log makes the most sense. We can take a quick look at the usage. And all these teams played last week, which is helpful. Saquon in the wild card round, 25 carries to 3 for Kenneth Gainwell. Saquon also 58.3% route participation, 2 targets, 0 targets for Kenneth Gainwell on 16.7. I don't think that Kenneth Gainwell has that much standalone value. Like I think he has if they get up by a lot in the second half, they might start using him more. But I think the Eagles just want to lean on Saquon Barkley in the playoffs. And obviously this is what we're seeing here. 82.5% snaps for Saquon, 17.5 for Kenneth Gainwell. He obviously has contingent upside if anything were to happen to Saquon or if the game is a blowout. Particularly if the Eagles are playing from ahead 3 scores or something. I'm not trying to say he has 0 value and 3% projected ownership for Gainwell, but I don't think he has a ton of standalone value. On the Ram side, no Blake Corum. And we had in the wild card round. So it was just Ronnie Rivers as the backup in the wild card round. 45 snaps for Kyren Williams, just 6 for Ronnie Rivers. Kyren had 16 carries to Ronnie Rivers' 3. and 3 targets on 37.9% route participation for Kyren, 0 targets on 3.4 for Ronnie Rivers. So not getting a ton from Ronnie Rivers here. Didn't play much, wasn't that involved. What is the price tag? 1% projected ownership at 4.1K. I probably don't get there. On a 2-game slate, you could. It's easier to make a case for Ty Johnson, Justice Hill, even Kenny Gainwell to some extent. All right. And then the 2 later games. So last week we had James Cook played, interesting, just 45.8% of snaps. Ty Johnson, 31 snaps to James Cook's 33. Man, that's a closer split than I thought it was. It was still 23 carries for James Cook, 9 for Ty Johnson. 2 targets for Ty Johnson on 43.8% route participation, 0 for James Cook on 21.9. Ty Johnson looks really good. I mean, just looking at how they used them last week, I think Ty Johnson looks like a really strong play. Should be involved in the passing game. 9 carries, not bad with Ray Davis. And actually, Ray Davis was still in for part of that game, played 7 snaps, had 8 carry. So I think Ty Johnson just going to get more of that work with Ray Davis out. Looks pretty good. And then finally, the Ravens last week. Derrick Henry, 26 carries. Justice Hill had 6. Justice Hill had 4 targets on 53.8% route participation. Derrick Henry 0 on 34.6% route participation against the Steelers. So none of the recent usage really changing how I view this situation. Worth noting that Keaton Mitchell did not get any carries, did not get any run in the wildcard round after he was. I thought there was a chance that Keaton Mitchell would have some involvement in the playoffs, but did not see that last week at least. Okay. Any questions about running backs? I'm going to check in on chat real quick. Oh, interesting. Matt says, I love Ty Johnson and Hill today, but according to the Buffalo beat writers, it looks like Davis may play. All right, I had written him off as just not playing today. Buffalo didn't elevate another running back from the practice squad either. So I guess it's possible. I mean, I still think I'll like Ty Johnson. Nuke wants to know who cares about Ray Davis. I mean, it's just a matter of he could impact the amount of work that Ty Johnson gets, or like the security of Ty Johnson's work, because he could, like, they split the RB2 carries a little bit, so he makes a little bit of a difference there. All right. Just reading through chat. All right. People asking, did the Davis news come out? Did we get some Ray Davis news? I don't think I've seen any Ray Davis news. I think it's just he might play. I think is all that we have right now. Okay. I saw some people talking about pick 6. Do you see they removed some of the unders in pick 6? I hate every change they make. I wish they would stop tinkering with it. But they're making changes. All right. So enough about the running back. So ultimately, love the 2 at the top, Saquon, Derrick Henry. I will be taking an underweight stance pretty significantly, I think, on Kyren Williams. I might have 30%, might not even get to 30% Kyren Williams. And if he kills me, he kills me. James Cook, I think I'm going to have about where the field is there. If anything, maybe a little bit lighter than they have it here, 39%. I think I'll be a little bit light on James Cook. But then I'll be overweight on certainly Ty Johnson and Justice Hill. I'll probably take overweight stances on both. At 3%, I think Gainwell is fine. I don't feel great about it because, again, I don't think he has much standalone value at all. But if something happened to Saquon, he would obviously look great. I don't know if I'll have any other, like, I don't think I'm playing Keaton Mitchell. Don't know that I don't think I would play Ray Davis if he's active. Maybe Ronnie Rivers just because he's 4,100 and has really strong contingent upside, but even that is like he'll contingent upside and then he's playing against the Eagles and they're just throwing it late in the game anyway. So I don't really know that there's much value there. But yeah, both Ty Johnson and Justice Hill look great. So I'd say those are the four that I plan on being with or overweight to the field are Saquon, Henry, and then Ty Johnson and Justice Hill. No issue with playing running backs from the same team in the same lineup. All right. Let's move on to receivers. Here we go. So Puka is the most expensive. Maybe I'll sort by fantasy point projection here. Puka projected for, damn, I did not realize how much he separated here. More than 5 fantasy points better than the second best receiver on the slate. I'm actually going to look at fantasy points also here. Yeah, I mean, similarly, five fantasy points better. The real reason I wanted to look at that is because I think the projection for Cooper Kupp is insane here. The 16.8 fantasy point projection for Cooper Kupp. I feel more comfortable with this projection of 8.6 for Cooper Kupp. I'm not sure what happened there, why that projection looks so off from where it should. But Puka Nacua looks pretty strong. I think I will probably end up a little bit light on Puka just because the matchup is so tough and I prefer the running backs. I mean, everybody has a tough matchup, so it doesn't really stand out from Puka, but I think because I'm going to have so much of Saquon and Henry, I probably end up honestly not that much lower than this, but a little bit light on 55%. It's really, really tough to make a great case to fade Puka Nacua other than the ownership and the price tag. So I'm not really going to try to sell you on fading Puka. I don't even know that I'm definitely going to be underweight there, but that's a lot of ownership. So in the wild card round, 9 targets, man, 96.6% route participation for Puka. In week 17, 93.9% route participation, 13 targets, 8, 14. Look at these target numbers. Just never. The 1 week that he had 4 targets, actually 2 weeks here where he had 4 targets, got injured in game or ejected in game in both of those games. Any game that he has not been cut short, he's had at least 8 targets. So it's really tough to make a case against Puka. I don't know if I can get to 55%. I probably will get to 55% Puka. So maybe I don't even want to say that I'll be light there. I think I'm okay with that ownership that Puka is getting. Cooper Kupp, again, here projected for 24% ownership. Fantasy points has him at 16.4%. I don't love it. He has not been great. He's cheap enough that I don't know. Outside of Puka Nacua, AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, would you be surprised to see Cooper Kupp as the highest scoring fantasy producer outside of those 3? I don't think I would be. So it's 16% ownership. I don't think I can take a massively overweight stance, but I think I'm probably going to be right in between these ownership projections on Cooper Kupp. So I'll probably have 18 to 20% or so Cooper Kupp, and hope that he comes in light, and then I'll be a little bit overweight. But he has not been. I mean, we can look at his game log also. This is not your father's Cooper Kupp. Last week, 1 target on just 55.2% route participation. The week prior, 3 targets on 78.8. So it's kind of the opposite of Puka Nacua. You just look at his recent game log, 3-3-3-1. Now he did have an 8 target game in week 14, 5, 9, 10. He's just really fallen off a cliff in recent weeks. Matt Butler posted the data in here yesterday. Just looking at recent weeks for Puka, for Cooper Kupp, his separation has been much worse. So he was actually better earlier in the year, and he seems to have fallen off from a separation standpoint, which is kind of reflected in the numbers, just not really getting any kind of target share here. Does not look great. So I'd be fine with 18% or so on a 2-game slate. at 5,400. Like it's a low enough ownership projection and price tag that I don't really want to full fade it because you can still kind of see it, but he has not been good. It's not a spot where I want to be significantly overweight on Cooper Kupp. And if he does come in at 24%, I'd like to be underweight on Cooper Kupp there. Going to go back here. AJ Brown, the second best projected. Actually, I'll finish off. I'll go team by team. So Puka, I think, looks pretty strong. I wouldn't have 80%, but at 55%, I think he looks like a pretty good bet. Cooper Kupp, I'll be 18, 20%, something around that range. Demarcus Robinson is, and if you were here yesterday, I talked about this a little bit, but it had been for a while looking like Demarcus Robinson was running more routes, but Tutu Atwell was actually getting more targets for a little bit. And then last week, here, and I guess I'll pull up. This is just the past 5 weeks in total for the Rams. Demarcus Robinson's played 5 games, 78% route participation, 10 targets over the past 5 games. Tutu Atwell, 31.8% route participation, 12 targets over the past 5 games. And that includes the wild card round. But in the wild card round specifically, we have Demarcus Robinson, 72.4% route participation, 2 targets. You don't even see Tutu Atwell here. Did not even run a route that was tracked by fantasy points. So for a while, it seemed like they were scheming to get him the ball. I mean, look at this week 18. I guess this is without the starters in week 18, so that's also a little bit misleading. But prior to week 18, Tutu out. Actually, I'll just pull up Tutu. Two, 3, 2, 3, 2 targets, even though he was running 18, 28, 34, 56, 32, 26% of routes. Like wasn't running that many routes, but was getting a couple targets per game. But then he didn't really play last week as we talked about yesterday. They were running more 2 tight end sets, which may have been so maybe really Tyler Higbee coming back. They just changed the whole game plan there and went away from Tutu in that one. It's possible that like this is a very different defense against the Eagles, not going to blitz nearly as much. It's possible that they change up the scheme again and do get Tutu back involved again. I don't think it's enough that I want to play him on a 2-game slate, but maybe in a showdown slate you can make that case that they will play more Tutu. But Demarcus Robinson I think looks like a pretty strong play here if the ownership is low enough. Still running all the routes. Projected for 7% ownership on a 2-game slate. I think this is a number that I'd like to be at least double the field. He's cheap, just $4,000, not getting much ownership. And again, if we look at the Demarcus Robinson game log, even though he hasn't done it recently, I don't think his role has changed at all. And he did have some games where he put up 17.5, 27.4 fantasy points, and then a whole lot of nothing, but then 12.9. You probably take that at 4,000. 10.2 doesn't kill you at 4,000. He had 4 games here with 0 fantasy points. Really wide range of outcomes, but in a large field GPP, you kind of like that, like a wide range of outcomes where the ceiling is have to have it. I'll take that for Demarcus Robinson. So yeah, 7% ownership. I think he looks really good. And then Tutu again, he's 3,300. I guess if you need a receiver and you only have 3,300 left over, I think he would be one to consider there. Probably prefer Nelson Aguilar. If you have the extra 100, I prefer Curtis Samuel. There are other better options because he like the floor is 0 and like 0 opportunity. But I don't think it's the worst play at 2% ownership. I don't know that I'll get to any on the 2-game slate. All right. And then the Eagles, you got AJ Brown coming in at 40% ownership, Devonta Smith, 36%. Man, at 5,600, that looks really good for Devonta Smith. I don't think I saw anything in the schedule adjusted that really stood out from like anybody looking good here. Let's see. Okay, so it's the bottom one here. All right, so split out wide. According to this, it's a somewhat positive matchup for outside receivers on the right in particular. Now, I don't want to read too much into this. I don't think they really like line up always in the same spot, but worth looking at since it's a 2-game slate. Puka is the receiver that lines up right the most with Darius Slay on him. I mean, none of these look like good matchups to me, but Darius Slay apparently the best this year of Quinion Mitchell, Darius Slay, and Cooper DeJean. So yeah. Oh, I'm looking in the wrong spot. I mean to be looking at Philadelphia. So the right wide receiver for Philadelphia is AJ Brown. So AJ Brown apparently has the best matchup in terms of schedule adjusted. But it looks like a slightly positive matchup for Devonta Smith and Jahan Dotson also, which is interesting relative to like when you look at their schedule adjusted, it's not a great matchup overall, but the individual matchups, they are favored. Ultimately, I think Devonta Smith at 36% ownership is just too low. Actually, where does... All right, so 41%, still probably too low at 5,600. I think Devonta Smith looks like a really strong play that I want to be above weight to the field. AJ Brown obviously also looks great. Okay, this ownership is probably more accurate for AJ Brown. And I'm probably with the field there at 40%. Seems about right. So yeah, I think the Eagles receivers, we don't have that many reliable receivers on the slate. That's part of the issue with this is Puka Nacua, obviously reliable. AJ Brown, Devonta Smith. I mean, even like reliable is not the right word there when I think AJ Brown had like 2 fantasy points last week. But projectable volume. And then it's kind of who do you want to play from the Bills? Nobody with much enthusiasm. Nobody from the Ravens receivers with much enthusiasm. So I'm probably just eating the ownership here. But Devonta Smith in particular, just because of the price tag, I think I'll be overweight there. Probably maybe overweight 40%. AJ Brown also probably like right around the field there. I don't have a lot of enthusiasm for Jahan Dotson. 1% ownership. I'd be kind of surprised if it's that low. Maybe it will be, but he scored a touchdown last week and then had multiple other opportunities where he could have scored a touchdown. So I'd be a little bit surprised if he comes in at 1% owned. If he does, like I think that's fine. If he comes in at 1% at 3,600 on a 2-game slate, like a touchdown might be enough for him to be optimal on a 2-game slate where not much scoring is expected. So there's a lot of volatility where that touchdown could matter. If he scores 9 or 10 fantasy points, that might be enough on a really low scoring slate. So I don't totally hate it at 1% owned. I don't know that I'll get there. But I like the starters. I like the 2 good starters, AJ Brown and Devonta Smith for the Eagles. And then it's a real mess with, I guess we'll start with Buffalo. And I'll bring up the game log here so we can see what they did in the wild card round. So nobody got to 60% route participation. Not a single Bills player got to 60% route participation in the wild card round. We had the leader was it Dalton? No, it was Khalil Shakir, 59.4% route participation, 6 targets. So he's kind of the leader of the Bills. And then excluding the tight ends, you've got Matt Collins and Curtis Samuel both at 43. Actually, Keon Coleman next up, 46.9%, ran 15 total routes to both Samuel and Matt Collins, running 14. Coleman saw 3 targets on 46.9% route participation. Then you have Curtis Samuel, 3 targets on 43.8. Matt Collins, 2 targets on 43.8. It is just a total mess here for the Bills. Amari Cooper, 3 targets on 40.6% route participation. Just a gross situation for the Bills. So in these where there is a lot of volatility, I'll lean into the ownership to some extent. And if they were all getting some, I would just want to fade it. Khalil Shakir, 52% ownership. That's just too much to me at 5,000 for a guy who saw 6 targets last week. He could have 3 catches for 30 yards this week, and I would not be the least bit surprised. I'll definitely be taking an underweight stance here. Now, he could have 12 targets and catch 8 balls for 100 yards. Pretty wide range of outcomes for Khalil Shakir, but just based on what we saw last week, and given that it might be a situation where they're not throwing it a lot, I'll lean into the volatility rather than being overweight on a guy who just doesn't have that awesome of a role, even as the wide receiver 1. Like, he's the pretty clear wide receiver 1 on the Bills, but it's not a great role to have. So I'll be underweight on Khalil Shakir for sure. Yeah, so so Fantasy Point says at 30% for Khalil Shakir, so pretty wide range of outcomes in terms of projected ownership. I'd be okay with playing 30% Khalil Shakir. That seems totally fine. So maybe I'll just play that amount and hope that he does come in at over 50%, and I'll be happy with the fade. But yeah, this would just be too much if it is accurate. Beyond Khalil Shakir, maybe we'll sort by team here. Matt Collins projected for 12% ownership at 3,500. Amari Cooper 11% at 4,400. Keon Coleman 19% at 4,100. Curtis Samuel 10.5% at 3,400. So all of them getting double digits. Curtis Samuel, I'm trying to think who looks the best here. Honestly, I think Amari Cooper, probably the one that I am the next most interested in. He is sort of a pay up to be contrarian. He's getting the least ownership. Actually, Curtis Samuel getting slightly less, but Amari Cooper not getting much. You may recall that last week I was hopeful that maybe they would start using their veteran star receiver a little bit more in the playoffs, and they really didn't last week. As we saw, he was targeted in the end zone early, but in general he was just kind of rotated in and out. So they didn't really lean on him last week. I still think that they could at some point in a game like this where it's a must-win game. Again, I mean, obviously it's a playoff; they're all must-win games. But in a game against an equal in the Ravens, I could see them lean on Amari Cooper, and more so just with an extra week of practice. So part of the issue and part of the reason I wasn't super confident in it last week was he was dealing with a family issue prior to last week's game, and I thought that interruption may have stopped them from fully being comfortable with him in the offense. But with another week of practice now, I think it's a little bit more likely that Cooper can be ready for a slightly expanded role. I think he's talented. The yards per route run have been awesome since he's been on the Bills. So I think that he's probably my favorite relative to ownership on the Bills. And then beyond him, it's probably, Curtis Samuel, because he's only getting 10.5%. It's all just kind of gross. Like, I think the ownership is approximately appropriate for the Bills receivers. Matt Collins, 12% looks fine at 3,500. Keon Coleman, 19%, 4,100 seems okay. I'm not taking any major stands here, but I think I'll be underweight Khalil Shakir if he comes in over 50%. I will be overweight Amari Cooper again if he does come in at around 10%. I'll probably get to 20% Amari Cooper. Seems like a pretty good bet. And then finally, the Ravens. So Rashod Bateman is the wide receiver one here. Bateman last week only saw 2 targets on 80.8% route participation. I did think it was promising that his route participation was as high as it was, because that was, I guess, not his season high, but like on the upper end of his range of route participation with Zay Flowers out. I thought that was promising. I do think that he is their top receiver at this point. I think the 2 targets was partially because he was shadowed by Joey Porter Jr. in that game. So I still think like the assumption that he is the wide receiver one and should see an expanded role, I think is still correct, and maybe a little bit more likely this week without Joey Porter Jr. shadowing him. So I think Bateman looks fine at 4,900. 35% ownership isn't a low enough number that I'm super enthusiastic about it. This is just 80% is clearly wrong for Rashod Bateman. Third, I think I'd probably be underweight to 35%. Not by much, though. I think that's a totally fine number. I'm playing a lot of Lamar, so maybe I do get there just because I'm playing so much Lamar. Does seem a bit much for his range of outcomes. Tylan Wallace at 3,000 looks good to me. He seemed to be the wide receiver 2 for the Ravens last week, at least in terms of route participation. I thought it was going to be Nelson Aguilar, but then at least last week it was 53.8% for Tylan Wallace to 34.6% for Nelson Aguilar in that game. So it was 5 more routes run for Tylan Wallace than Nelson Aguilar. He has shown the ability to break off a splash play in his limited time. You remember the game where he came out of nowhere and had 115 yards on 3 catches. So we know that he can do it. So if he's going to get over 50% of the routes at the min price, I think he looks really good. So I like Tylan Wallace quite a bit. 17% ownership is a fair number. I think I'd probably come in slightly overweight to 17%. I do think he is the best option outside of Bateman on the team. Nelson Aguilar, not far behind, 3,300, projected for 6% ownership. Like that's low enough ownership that I do have some interest in Nelson Aguilar also. I don't know that I'll get to any of these other 3, Miller, Sims, or Walker, on the 2-game slate. Probably more showdown plays, but we can take a look at the. So last week it was Anthony Miller ran 5 total routes, saw 3 targets. I mean, that's kind of interesting. 3 targets on 5 total routes. As I recall, they like schemed up something like short. Actually, we can look at the ADOT. Yeah, 3.3 ADOT. It's kind of interesting. Like they were scheming to get him the ball a little bit. So maybe Miller. Miller would be the next one up for me. Steven Sims ran just 1 route. But yeah, I take it back. That is kind of intriguing that they 3 targets on 5 routes and they're just targeting him short, trying to get the ball in his hands, let him do the work after the catch. Could have a little bit bigger role here. Seems good for a bad weather matchup. Maybe they try to just short throws a little bit more. So Miller looks okay, but I mean still 19% route participation, still more of a showdown play. I don't know that I like him on the 2-game slate. Probably don't get there. All right. I think that's it for receivers. Oh, did we look at schedule adjusted? I think we did. Well, let's go over it one more time. Schedule adjusted matchups. Middling matchup for Baltimore receivers against Buffalo. Oh, this is for the full season. I'll go last 5. Yeah, so still middling matchup over the last 5 for Baltimore receivers against Buffalo. Tough matchup for Rams receivers, or should say below average matchup in recent weeks for Rams receivers. Tough matchup, 5th worst for Buffalo receivers, and then 2nd worst for Philadelphia receivers over the past 5 weeks. So nothing really standing out as better than the others there. I'm going to check in on chat before we move on to tight ends. Casey had a dream about Anthony Miller last night. Did he score a touchdown in that dream? What did he do? Is Bateman chalk? I mean, kind of. Like 36% on a 2-game slate is sort of 35% lower than you would have thought. I mean, there aren't that many great options here, so I guess I kind of get it. But this is one where, like, I think you see this all the time in NBA, where it's like you see bad chalk when it is nobody looks good. So then the best of the players who look bad end up getting a lot of ownership. We're definitely seeing that if Khalil Shakir comes in at over 50%. Like he's just not a great play and could work. But I don't love it. Like it's definitely like you see some bad chalk condense on slates like this where there's a ton of bad options and the ownership has to go somewhere. And I think Bateman, if he gets high enough, if he does get over 35%, I think I would put him in that category. I think he looks fine. I want to be enthusiastic about it because I want to play a lot of Lamar. And I do think he was probably limited in part by the matchup last week, which goes away this week. And he should be the top receiver here. But you show the matchups for the Bills wide receivers versus the Ravens. Yeah, I can do that. So they only show the top 3. So they have it as Khalil Shakir going up against Marlon Humphrey, Keon Coleman against Nate Wiggins, and Amari Cooper against Brandon Stevens. None of them good matchups, and none of them are shadow situations. I think the only shadow situation we had this entire weekend was Nico Collins on Trent McDuffie. So not fantasy points not projecting for any shadows here. But these are the primary matchups that fantasy points has is Khalil Shakir on Marlon Humphrey, Keon Coleman, Nate Wiggins, and Amari Cooper, Brandon Stevens. But yeah, 35% to Bateman seems fine. All right. All right, I'm not going to scroll all the way up, I don't think. So if you have any questions or anything, make sure you repeat them. Let's see. That's funny. It's funny, Casey. All right. Moving on. 2 tight ends. 1 second. All right. And the tight ends look really good on this slate in general. I think it's probably not going to be a 4 wide receiver slate for me most often. And I don't set any kind of rules for this in the optimizer I use. So if I get 4 wide receivers, I get them. But I think it's going to be a lot of either 2 tight ends or 3 running backs in a lot of my lineups. Because the tight ends look like really strong plays here. I'm going to sort by fantasy points here. So Mark Andrews projects the best. He is 4,500, 26% ownership with a projection of 11.22. So let's just, I'm going to pull up tight ends and wide receivers to see where these tight ends rank in projection with the wide receivers. So we have Puka and the Cooper Kupp, which too high projection there. AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, Khalil Shakir, and then Mark Andrews is the 6th overall projection of tight ends and wide receivers on this slate. And then Bateman, and then you get Dallas Goedert and Isaiah Likely and Dalton Kincaid. So you see, and Tyler Higbee not far down. So a lot of these tight ends are among the top projections on the slate. And I don't know if you can combine them here, but I think the tight ends would look even better at fantasy points, where Cooper Kupp is, I think, more reasonably projected, in my opinion. Andrews projects for 12.2, then Likely, then Goddard. A lot of really strong projections among the tight ends here. So I'm going to like the tight ends. Andrews is probably my favorite. He is also the most expensive and the most owned. So the field likes him the best. Also, he just prior to last week's dud, I was looking through his game logs at the end of the regular season, and it was like double-digit fantasy points in 9 of his last 12 games or something like that. And some of them spiked quite a bit more than double-digit in terms of PPR points, at least. Just pretty strong usage for Mark Andrews. I guess I need to pull up his game log here. Oh, okay, good. So last week, like I said, was a dud, but he still ran 73.1% of the routes. And it was just a tough kind of matchup. I don't think anybody really had a great game there. Just 3 targets in that one. But the week prior to that, in week 18, 8 targets on 68.4% route participation, 2 in week 17, but then 6 in week 16. I guess 2 again, 15, but then 7, 5. I don't know. A lot of strong target games for Mark Andrews. Now I'm questioning myself. Has he not been fantasy points per game? So 5.2 last week, but then it was 15.4, 14.8, 13.8, 10.4, 18.9, 15.6. So just he's been productive. And with Zay Flowers out, much like Bateman, like I would expect a bump to all of the other pass catchers on the Ravens with Zay Flowers out and Mark Andrews included in that group. So I think he looks like a really strong play with no Zay Flowers. Likely similarly, like I actually think Likely gets the biggest boost with no Zay Flowers. Last week, 65.4% route participation for Isaiah Likely, which, if you look at his game log here, that was higher. He did play 70% in week 17, but outside of that, 65.4 is among his highest route participation of the entire season. And I think he should, it makes sense that he would benefit from Zay Flowers being out, go to one of your other more trusted pass catchers. So I think Likely benefits pretty significantly here. Project for 25% ownership, but that's fine. He's only 3,500, so the price is really good for Likely. He's priced like a lot of those kind of semi-viable receivers, and I think I like him better than a lot of them, than the majority of them. So I like both Andrews and Likely quite a bit. Dallas Goedert looks really good here. He's only 3,900, project for 23% ownership. And here's where I'll pull up the matchup data. schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. Second best possible matchup for a tight end against the Rams in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. So looks great here for the matchup. Oh, and Baltimore up here as well. Looks like it is the 6th best matchup for tight ends against Buffalo. So it looks great for both Likely and Andrews. And then not as good for worst possible matchup for Tyler Higbee against Philadelphia. And then not a great matchup for Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox. Bottom 10 or so. So love the Baltimore guys. Love Goddard here at 23%. Kincaid, I don't know. We looked at how much of a mess it is for the Bills. That includes Kincaid, just not that involved. Kincaid 53.1% route participation in the wild card round. Dawson Knox 40.6%. They each saw just 3 targets. He's not really like an alpha tight end. So I think he's okay, but 21% is a fine number, not one that I really want to get above weight on. I might even come in underweight to the field there. Higbee looks good to me despite the really tough matchup. If he really does come in at 10% ownership, we saw how much of a part of the game plan he was last week. He scored 10 fantasy points in the first quarter before he got hurt last week. So if he's going to be anything close to that kind of involvement and can last the whole game, and he's obviously not going to be targeted like he was. I don't know how many targets he saw in that game. I guess I can pull it up here. 5 targets in, I think he only played the first quarter. We're not projecting. He's obviously not going to get targeted 20 times, but if he gets targeted 8 times at his price tag, he's going to look really good here. So yeah, I think Higbee looks like a pretty strong play if he does get single digit ownership. Dawson Knox actually looked like a pretty good, like they trusted him last week, threw it to him in the red zone. 9% projected ownership at 2,700 seems pretty good. And then on a 2-game slate, you can take dart throws on the likes of Colby Parkinson, who was Parkinson. It was Allen who scored the touchdown last week, but it was Parkinson who actually ran more routes after Tyler Higbee left. Hunter Long ran 4 routes in that game. Davis Allen ran 4 routes. Colby Parkinson ran 12 routes in that game, saw a couple targets. So I think it was just kind of fluky that it was Davis Allen that scored the touchdown. If I were to play any backup Rams tight end, it would be Colby Parkinson. But I'm not really enthusiastic about playing any of these others. I think the top end tight ends look good enough that I'm probably just going to lean into primarily the Baltimore duo and Dallas Goedert. Higbee to some extent. And then Kincaid is, I'll probably be with maybe slightly below the field on Kincaid. 21% seems okay. I'll probably have enough 2 tight end sets that I'll get there. Okay. Eric says Calcaterra is sneaky. I don't know. Let me see. I think with Dallas Goedert back, I'm not expecting much from Calcaterra, but we can look at. I got a question about what site I'm using, so I will answer that in a second here too. 6 routes last week for Calcaterra, just 1 target on a 2-game slate, like 1 touchdown for 10 yards could get it done for Calcaterra. So I guess like he's playable. I assume he's min priced. He's 2,800. Like I'd rather play Dawson Knox, I think, than Calcaterra. But he's 1% owned. Like if you want to make the bet on he scores a touchdown and nobody else does anything, I think that's fine. So to answer the question, what site am I using? From Zach. So what you're seeing right now, this is RotoGrinders lineup HQ. So this is the optimizer that I use. You can see RotoGrinders projected ownership, projected fantasy points, etc. Here within lineup HQ, you also get like Kevin Ross weather reports. So it is really, I really enjoy lineup HQ, especially for these showdown slates. I always use it. And if you want to get access, you can get it for $10 off using the link in the description of this video. Everything else that I'm using this is fantasy points. Just they have a projections page. This is part of the fantasy points NFL package. And then all of this, not this. This is also part of their NFL package. This is under research and reports, the fantasy points schedule adjusted fantasy points per game allowed page. But most of what I'm using here, this is the Fantasy Points data suite. So all this stuff where I am looking through the data is the Fantasy Points data suite, which is its own package at Fantasy Points. I do not currently have any kind of promo code. They stopped doing the promo codes late in the year. I think they'll start doing them again sometime in like March, but it's a really cool tool. If worth it to get it if you're going to use it even without a promo code. I use it all the time. Okay, I think that does it for tight ends. Let's move on to defenses kickers is just always, honestly, I probably could have taken a closer look than I did at defenses kickers. I usually kind of let it just go randomly here. I allow for defenses against my quarterbacks, etc. Josh Allen historically has been he turnover prone a little bit. So I think Ravens defense makes some sense against Josh Allen. I think the Rams and the Eagles defenses, Rams defense in particular, like Jalen Hurts gets sacked quite a bit. But generally, it's just going to be who randomly spikes a touchdown is going to be the defense you want. If nobody does, then I don't know. It's so random that I don't take close looks at the defense. But I think the Rams look pretty good to me as the cheapest option against Jalen Hurts, who gets sacked a good amount. And then kind of random from there. I guess my two favorites might be the two cheapest here, Rams and Ravens. But I think they all look pretty strong. I'm not really saying anything when I say they all look pretty strong off the four defenses. It's all just random. Nobody can predict it, is what I'm saying. Okay. So fit who makes sense for your lineup. Showdown slates. I'll take a look at both of them briefly. Then I'll play around with some lineups. Maybe I'll play here. I'll do a lineup first for the main slate, and then I'll look at the showdown slates. If I can find a Sunday special, Sunday only. Okay, I think this must be the main slate. Yep. So let's see. If I were to play some of my favorites here, let's see what I can do if I make a Saquon Henry lineup, since they are my favorites. Then at wide receiver, Devonta Smith. Maybe I'll throw in Tylan Wallace. Now I can go pretty chalky. Could I fit Puka Nacua in this lineup if I do Stafford? Let me see if I can do this. If I go Stafford here. Yeah, this actually looks like it. If I play Stafford, I can make this work. I'll go Stafford and Ravens defense. Tight end. This is actually not as difficult as I thought it would be if you play Stafford. Now, if I go cheap, then I could actually pay up at a quarterback also. If I go like Higbee and Likely, I think I could. Yeah, then I can pay up for Lamar Jackson. That's gross. Look at that. Look at how messy that is. But it's actually possible to fit Lamar with Barkley and Henry and Puka Nacua. Devonta Smith is reasonable. Higbee, Likely, both reasonable plays. So that's interesting that you can fit them all. So then where would you, if I were to play Stafford, what would that allow me to get to? Since I already have the spend up Barkley and Henry and Puka. I could almost play James Cook here. Now, if I go Cook, let's see. Stick with the cheapest defense here. Then I can play 3,200. Then I would have to go to Colby Parkinson. Now, if I went down away from Devonta Smith to, Cooper Kupp, I'd go double. That could work. Now I've got Stafford triple stacked. sort of interesting. Stafford triple stacked, just play for the Rams, massively outperform expectations. Stafford with Cup and Nacua and the Rams defense. That allows me to play all of Barkley and Henry and Cook, and then Tylan Wallace to make it all fit. I don't totally hate that. He uses the full salary cap. My guess is that this one is going to be duped a bit, but I don't totally hate that lineup. All right, I'm gonna look at the showdown slates, starting with the first one. Rams Eagles. So starting at captain, Puka getting 19% ownership, no issue at all with that. Barkley 15. I mean, the top three in particular, I think they all just look really good. I have no issue with those ownership numbers. I do like AJ Brown 9%. I don't love Kyren. All right, let me see what stands out, because you can't play everybody. Goddard's pretty cheap. I think if I were playing like just one lineup, I probably would go to either Puka Nacua or Saquon Barkley as my captain. I think I lean toward Barkley captain for my if I were making my first lineup. If I were making three, it probably would be those top three: Puka, Barkley. I'm debating whether I would throw in one of these Eagles pass catchers instead, but I think it probably would just be those three. Would be my three favorite captains. I think Goddard looks pretty good if you want to pay down for a contrarian captain option. Yeah, I think I'm mostly eating the chocolate captain though. But Devonta Smith and Goddard both look like clearly have big potential and not getting a ton of ownership. So I think both look like pretty strong contrarian options. I would probably break the tie to where I probably prefer Devonta Smith there. Just bigger upside, but both look pretty good. Hopefully the flex, I can find something more interesting. Again, I probably go a little bit lighter on Kyren than 36%. Really like Devonta Smith again. 8,000 project for 29% ownership. I think that looks awesome. Dallas Goedert looks awesome. 26% ownership at 5,800. So those two kind of stand out for their prices and ownership projections. Not very often you see a quarterback projected for 26% ownership on a showdown slate. I mean, I guess I want to fade Stafford, but if he does come in at 26%, tough to really argue with that number. Higbee looks great at 19%, 4,400. Even in a really tough matchup, I really like that. The defense is a little bit higher owned than I thought they would be. I wanted to like them, but I think that is just kind of fair ownership there. Demarcus Robinson, I really like 14% projected ownership at 4,000. Really strong play there. I think Tutu is playable on the showdown slate. Just if you want to think this is a totally different matchup, maybe they go back to what they were doing and they scheme to get him the ball a little bit more. Yeah, Jahan Dotson, 5%, I guess is fine. On a showdown slate, that's totally fine. 5% at 3,200 for a guy who runs more than 50% of the routes. Calcaterra, again, just the classic backup, hope for a touchdown. Same thing with Davis Allen. A lot of those kind of plays on this slate. But yeah, standing out to me would be these Eagles in kind of the mid-range prices, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert. So maybe this is a lineup that could kind of make itself if we go Jalen Hurts at captain. I'm going to leave this. So for the showdown slate, if I go Jalen Hurts at captain with Devonta Smith and Dallas Goedert, now throw in a Demarcus Robinson, 8,000 left. So I could play one cheaper option, one pay up option. I mean, I could go with the triple stack with AJ Brown. That leaves me enough to play Eagles defense. I'm only playing one Rams player. Kind of a weird build with the full passing game and then also the defense, slight negative correlation there with Eagles defense and the passing game, but not like massive negative correlation. Like the Eagles defense could have 2 interceptions and 2 sacks, and they don't result in scores. So maybe they have an interception and they get stopped at the 10-yard line, and then suddenly Hurts throws it to Goddard for a touchdown. I don't know. It's negative correlation, but sometimes you want to eat that on a showdown slate. I think this could work for an Eagles onslaught. Could also do a little bit different. Go to, instead of AJ Brown, go to Stafford. Stafford with Robinson. Can't get up to Nacua from any of these other pass catchers as it is right now. But if I went from Devontae to Nacua and then down off of the Eagles defense to, well, Higbee would fit there. But now I only have a single stack with Jalen Hurts, which is fine. But maybe this would be a lineup where it makes sense to play Jahan Dotson, Jalen Hurts with, man, that's gross. Jalen Hurts with Goddard and Dotson. I don't really love that, but it's playable on a large field slate. All right, I'm going to look at the other showdown slate. Actually, I'll stay here and I'll check in on any questions before I get back to it. Let's see here. All right. AJ Brown, a good play? Yes, I like AJ Brown. I thought Flowers was actually ruled out at this point. He's possible to play next week, but no, I don't think there's any chance he plays tonight. I think that they might have already declared that he's out, but either way, I'm not expecting him to play. All right. Is a hot dog a sandwich? Great question. Thank you. Thank you for asking. I've been waiting for somebody to ask me that. And my answer is no. I think it's all just vibes. It's all vibes based. And to me, a hot dog does not vibe as a sandwich for me. All right, I'm going to get back, look at the other showdown slate real quick, and then I'll make my lineups. Josh Allen, 21%, Lamar Jackson, 17%, Derrick Henry, 14%, captain ownership. Yeah, looking at these numbers, I kind of like the top 3 again. I'm not getting too different from the field. I think I would flip. I like Lamar, I think, better than Josh Allen. So I'd probably flip their ownership. Derrick Henry looks great. Again, I'd probably be a little bit light on Khalil Shakir. Mark Andrews, probably my favorite contrarian captain option here. Pretty cheap, 4% ownership. Could just be like the clear number 1 pass catcher. So I really like Mark Andrews as a captain on this slate. If you wanted to go to like a Justice Hill or, I mean, Ty Johnson's even cheaper. Go to one of those 2 as a captain. I actually think they're viable captains on this slate. But yeah, I think Mark Andrews, like ownership included, I think Mark Andrews is probably my favorite play at captain. But I like eating the chalk here too. I think Jackson, Allen, Henry look great. We can get different in the flex, and there are several pretty good flex contrarian options here that are both like value and flex, so I think this sets up as kind of a stars and scrubsy type of slate, with the exception of I kind of like the mid-range Andrews and Likely. So I don't know, maybe I take it back to some extent, but the value makes it possible to just play a lot of Allen, Jackson, and Henry, I guess is what I'm saying. And I probably will. I'll play a lot of all 3 of them. But Andrews, 26%. I like that number. Bateman's more expensive and getting about the same ownership. So I just prefer Andrews to Bateman here. Likely a little bit cheaper, getting 23% ownership. Looks good. I think I'll be overweight to the field there. Really like Ty Johnson, 15% ownership at 4,400. Looks pretty great to me. Justice Hill, 18% at 4,800. But we have so many of these. Like, again, I don't feel great about Keon Coleman or Matt Collins or Curtis Samuel or Amari Cooper, but I'll be mixing and matching quite a bit. See if I can find a favorite of that group. I think it is Amari Cooper is very much just a pay up to be contrarian option at sub 10% ownership. I think I'll probably be double the field on Amari Cooper. Anthony Miller actually looks like a really strong. He was the one, right? It was Anthony Miller that got those like couple targets on no route participation, like low A dot stuff, which plays even better on. Yeah, he had 3 targets on 5 routes last week. That's pretty intriguing for a showdown slate at his price tag of 800, where you might need the price savings if he just has 3 catches. If he catches all 3 of them for a total of 15 yards, that might be all you need at his price tag. So I do think Anthony Miller, and obviously could be more involved this week. So I think Anthony Miller looks pretty good at 800. Trying to see who I like the best of the Bills receivers, and Khalil Shakir is kind of his own thing because he is the only one that you can kind of count on for, like, he'll lead the team in routes. He'll probably lead the team in targets. He's also getting the most ownership at the highest price tag. He's probably the one that relative to ownership, I like the least. He has had some spike weeks, but then I'm probably mostly playing the good expensive players instead of Khalil Shakir, and then mixing in the kind of grosser Keon Coleman at 3,600 looks like decent value, fairly contrarian. Kind of like Dawson Knox. They just seem to trust him. He's only 2,800, 15% ownership, looks pretty good. As much as I usually play defenses, I don't think I'm playing a ton of the defenses on this one. I mean, you could, like, it's a bad weather. Things could go haywire here. Maybe the defenses are looking good, but they're getting about as much ownership as I think they probably should. I'm trying to find some stands here. Tylan Wallace actually looks great. Tylan Wallace is just 1,017% ownership. That does stand out as he looks like a really strong play, because I think he's like right there with all of those Bills, with the Keon Coleman and Curtis Samuel and Matt Collins. Like, in terms of the range of outcomes, it's very similar, I think, for Tylan Wallace. Coleman, I mean, you can see he projects better, probably more likely to hit the ceiling, but I think the range of outcomes is not that far different. Just looking at like the targets and the route participation, and he's only 1,000, and he's getting the same ownership as Keon Coleman, only a little bit more than Samuel Hollins. So I do like Tylan Wallace quite a bit as a salary saving option. I'll be overweight again I mean, Ty Johnson, I like quite a bit. So I guess I'm finding some that I like more than others. It's hard to poke too many holes in these ownership numbers, players that I really dislike. But I will say I like Ty Johnson quite a bit. I like Tylan Wallace quite a bit. And then I really like the expensive guys. Let's kind of see. Let me try to build a lineup here. All right. So if I do, I'll go Lamar at captain. With Ty Johnson. Throw Tylan Wallace in there right away. I do like Mark Andrews. Or Isaiah Likely. Could do either. Now I have decent salary left over. Kind of an awkward salary range here because I can't get Allen and Cook. Maybe I don't want to. Let's see. What could I do with Allen? If I have Allen in there. So now Shakir fits, and he is the best option of the Bills. So that could work. As much as I talked about not loving the ownership for Shakir, I think he's clearly the best, the most likely to hit a ceiling of the Bills receivers. So this one leaves 900 on the table, double stacked with Lamar, Allen single stacked, or double if you want to include Ty Johnson. I actually think that looks like a pretty strong lineup. If I want to go the other route, I could go, instead of Andrews there, go with Likely. And now I have more salary to play with. Then I can go with Henry and Cook. 700 left on the table. Assume that there's a lot of running in this game. We do have Lamar double stacked with Wallace and likely Henry. I'm not including as a theoretical stacking partner, just not that involved in the passing game much. But we have the double Bills running backs. Probably not going to be a super dupe lineup. Yeah, I think that looks like a pretty strong large field GPP play. All right. How do you dare to play the ghost of Justin Tucker? Yeah, he's tough. Is a burger a sandwich? Burger is also not a sandwich, in my opinion. A burger is its own thing. It's a burger. Keon Coleman. I don't know if you're talking about a specific lineup, but yeah, I think Keon Coleman looks pretty good, but also like, what do you run 50% of the routes last week? Not like he's super involved or anything. Goddard, good captain. I agree with that. I like Goddard as a captain in the first showdown. I think he looks pretty good. Aguilar or Atwell. If I were to like for the 2-game slate, I guess you're talking about the 2-game slate, it would be Aguilar for me. Atwell might not see the field, might not run any routes, whereas I think Aguilar he will. So yeah, it would be Aguilar if I'm choosing one of them. I don't think I mean you can play the ghost of Justin Tucker, but bad weather, he's been pretty bad. I think he's fine. Yep, Anthony Miller looks like a good dart on the same page there. All right. Anything else? I think that's it. I think that is it. I think we've gone over everything I need to go over on the slate, and I still have 18 minutes to make my lineups, then get over to my Eagles fan friend's house to cheer for the Eagles with him. So I'm going to get out of here. Thank you guys very much for hanging out with me during the show. If you have not done so, please do subscribe to the channel. Again, trying to get to 5,000 by the end of the NFL season. Probably not going to get there at this rate, but I'm trying. I'm trying here, and any support would very much be appreciated. Thank you for hanging out. Join the Discord, Flaniverse Discord, link in the description if you're interested. Thanks, guys. I will catch you later, and good luck. Let's win some money today.